Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Hello again and welcome back. We continue the story of our journey through the madness of the 1950s and 60s London gangster scene, when me and my brother Ron ran the East End and other parts of the capital with fear. In the previous episode, we were discussing some of the characters I have known down the years. We left the story with Albert the Jar. He was so named because he sold so many jar goons, fake stones. He would laugh his way out of any situation if any receiver caught up with him after being taken for a ride. He was so confident in his own ability to con people and get away with it, even if caught. John Hall was another one, an East End gunman, but he came to a bad end. John had been arrested and placed in the cells on many occasions over the years, triggering off a claustrophobia condition. These attacks became more severe each time, and consequently his hatred towards the law increased. One day, he was called into a police station for questioning. He was lucky this time, and was released without charge for the time being. But back at home, John began brooding over the threat of further imprisonment, and in his confused state of mind, decided he had only one course of action. The following day, he walked into a police station, pulled out a revolver and shot dead the first policeman he saw, before turning around and walking out. He then went to a phone booth where he paused to make a call. A short time later, shots were heard, and John Hall lay dead with a bullet in his brain. The police reported suicide, but local opinion disputed the allegation. For some in the East End, prison was just a different way of life. Charlie Richardson and his brother Eddie, both from South London, were infamous as leaders of the so-called Richardson torture gang. Charlie and Eddie were eventually convicted of fraud, extortion, assault, and grievous bodily harm. They were sentenced to 25 and 10 years respectively. Ron and I first encountered Charlie Richardson in the army prison at Shepton Mallet, where we were all serving sentences. I later served time with Eddie Richardson at Leicester Prison in 1971. We were both in the security block and passed the time by playing table tennis together while the tabloid newspapers still reported the feuding rivalry between the Kray and Richardson gangs. Years later, I met up with Charlie again at Parkhurst, and his sense of humour, which always appealed to me, had not been lost. When he finished work for the day in the prison workshop, he sought the comfort of his favourite armchair, refusing to move for anyone or anything. He even delegated someone to make him tea, and was content to sit there until it was time for him to be locked up in the seclusion of his cell. Frankie Fraser is now a retired con after having spent over 20 years in prison. He acquired the alias Mad Frank due to his time spent in Broadmoor. Since his teenage days, he has been a force to be reckoned with in the criminal underworld, and until his retirement, he remained one of the top men in the London scene. He received a 15-year sentence for his part in the famous Richardson trials, and 7 years for his involvement in the Jack Spot attack. It's funny how times change, but if I met them today, I'd buy Charlie or Frankie a drink. It doesn't matter what the connection was. As we grow older, We miss those people we knew in our youth, probably because they were such a significant part of our past. In those days, there was a tendency to lose ourselves in complacency and simply allow ourselves to flow along with the tide of time, not realizing until we look back that we had drifted further than we anticipated, and our lives were drowning in dreams and memories. Occasionally, a friend would become an enemy, of course. George Dixon from West Ham was 6 foot tall, with blonde hair, and his physique was complemented by extremely broad shoulders. He was an accomplished fighter and had knocked out many rivals with a single punch. His brother Alan was an equally tough street fighter, and often the two would fight each other as furiously as they fought others. Both have marked faces from the many battles they were in during the 1950s and early 60s. But George and Alan are today smartly dressed and handsome men. At one time, George was in the Rising Sun public house in Roman Road when, in full view of everyone, a fella accosted him with a sawn-off shotgun. George calmly pushed the weapon aside, floored the fella with one punch, and claimed the weapon. Big George, as he was fondly called, has been hit on the head, had his face slashed, been shot at and served time in prison, yet still he survived. When we were all free men, though, Ron and George had a disagreement, and as such, George had been warned to stay out of the Regency Gambling Club. But George, being the man he was, disobeyed Ron's advice and entered with 2 friends. I watched Ron's reaction. His face went white with anger. He eased himself from the chair he was sitting in and headed for the men's room, where I knew he kept a revolver hidden in the top of the cistern. Presently, he entered the casino area and stared at Dixon. Then, almost nonchalantly, he pulled the gun out of his pocket and calmly raised it in the air, lining it up with the intention of shooting Dixon in the head. Acting on impulse, I grabbed the gun handle and caused it to fall to the floor. As it came to rest, I heard a click and shouted out a warning to Dixon, "Fuck off quick." George grasped the situation he was in, and he and his companions very quickly left the club. Ron and I then had an argument as to why I had interfered in his personal business. Later on, though, when he opened the gun, we saw the firing pin had put an indentation in the bullet, but for some reason it hadn't gone off. Sometime later, when they had patched up their differences, Ron presented George with the bullet to keep as a souvenir. And I heard that George wore it around his neck for many years. When Ron and I were convicted in 1969, the police concentrated their efforts on securing another conviction against George and Alan. They suggested the Dixons were trying to fill the void left by us in the local underground scene. They were convicted and sent down for 12 and 9 years respectively. I made many mistakes and misjudgments over the years, and one of these was springing Frank the Mad Axeman Mitchell from Dartmoor, where he was serving a life sentence for holding an old couple captive while he sat over them holding an axe balanced on his knee. Ron and I had met Frank years before when we did time together in Wandsworth. He was a big, powerful man whom no one could control, mainly because he had the mind of a child, and like a child, if he didn't get his own way, he'd kick off. And with someone of his size, that caused many problems for the authorities, so much so that they shoved him into Broadmoor and Rampton on a few occasions. But he was a likeable fella in a childish sort of way. After we'd done our time in Wandsworth, which had only been 6 months for GBH, Ronnie kept in touch with Frank. Or, more to the point, Frank kept in touch with Ronnie. Letter after letter arrived at Valence Road, and because Ronnie was no letter writer, most of the time it was Mum who answered them. They were all mostly in the same vein, with Frank complaining that the Home Office would not give him a release date, which all prisoners want. because it gives them something to work towards. Eventually, Ronnie got it into his head that it would be doing Frank a big favour if we got him out of Dartmoor. At one time, if you were a mental patient and got out of the hospital and stayed at large for some time without getting into trouble, the authorities that had put you there had to reconsider your position. I'm sure this was in the back of Ronnie's mind, though the same does not apply to a prisoner on the run. But at the same time, he thought a bit of publicity might force the prison authorities to give Frank a date when he could hope to be released. Why I let myself get talked into it, I don't know. But when Ronnie got a bee in his bonnet, he could be very persuasive. I came round in the end, thinking if nothing else, it would stick 2 fingers up to the law, which we'd been doing since we were kids. Getting out of Dartmoor was not quite accurate, because most of Frank's days were spent outside the walls anyway. It seemed the screws found him a lot easier to control if he was left to his own devices, and that meant allowing him to wander around on the moor and even pop into a local pub with a screw keeping an eye on him, so lifting him would be no problem. To set the plan in action, I got the old-time boxer Ted Kid Lewis to offer to go into the prison and give a talk while showing boxing films. The governor loved the idea, and of course, I stuck a hat on and a pair of heavy glasses and accompanied Ted in disguise. This gave me a chance to have a word with Frank and fill him in on what we planned. A week later, I sent Albert Donahue, Mad Teddy Smith, and Billy Exley to pick Frank up at a pre-arranged location. It was as simple as that, and in no time, even before he was reported missing, he was safely inside the flat of Lenny Dunn in Canning Town. Apart from Ron and me being pretty busy, we'd heard that Frank was making a fucking nuisance of himself, so we didn't go round to see him. We'd done what we'd set out to do, and as far as we were concerned, that was that. We heard he wanted to go up west to find himself a girl, and we couldn't let that happen because without a shadow of a doubt, being as conspicuous as he was, he'd have been picked up in 5 minutes. So we arranged for one of our girls from the Winston Club, Lisa Prescott, to go round to the flat and keep him company. That kept him quiet for a while, but then he started complaining that he wasn't being shown respect because we weren't spending time with him, and he was bored in the flat. More and more, he was threatening to come to Valence Road to find us. We had 3 choices: hand him over to the police, in which case he would point the finger at us straight away, just let him leave, whereupon he'd be lifted very soon and again put us in the frame, or the third option, which really was the only solution to our problem before it all went pear-shaped, we'd have him killed. With the idea in place, we didn't hang about because even Scotch Jack Dixon was having a problem keeping him under control, and he was no pushover. I got in touch with Freddie Foreman, Alfie Gerard, and Jerry Callahan, who would sort out Frank. Alfie and his son Nicky were known throughout the underworld as Murder for Hire, and it was to Nicky that Ronnie Knight turned when he wanted rough justice against the man who had stabbed his younger brother David to death in a club. Nicky did the business for £1,000, paid to him by Ronnie Knight, but later on was himself shot dead. Frank was told that he was going to be taken into the country where he would meet up with Ronnie. For a while, he was quite happy with the thought of getting out of the flat, but then he kicked up and said he wouldn't go unless Lisa went with him. It was explained to him that she would have to travel in a separate car in case they got stopped. He accepted that and couldn't wait for the off. It was dark and raining when Albert Donahue led him downstairs to the waiting van. He opened up the back doors and Frank settled himself on the right-hand side wheel arch in the back. Before the van drew away, Alfie and Freddie pulled their guns out and shot him to death. A tough guy until the end, They had to shoot him more than 10 times before he finally slumped to the floor. His body was later taken out into the deep fishing lanes of the English Channel, wrapped up in chicken wire, weighted down, and thrown overboard. Soon after, Alfie took off to Australia, and the law never followed him, even though his name popped into the frame. With 26 years behind the door to contemplate the consequences, I can say that what happened to Jack McVitie was a serious lack of judgment. Not that this was the only thing that put me in my present predicament, but it was certainly the catalyst. I hear talk that I was egged on to do what I did by Ronnie, supposedly saying, "I've done one, now it's your turn." This was not the case at all. What happened was a very spur-of-the-moment thing, and was really brought about by Jack himself. There was a time when Jack was not a bad bloke. I first met him while serving a sentence, and in the same prison was George Cornell. Both men would eventually shape the future of Ronnie and me. I met up with Jack some years later when he came to the Regal looking for work. We gave him some bits and pieces and he carried them out quite satisfactorily. But as time went on, he began to drink heavily and was sniffing the white powder. While he was sober and not out of his head, he was okay. But when not, he turned into big trouble. We had paid him to carry out a job, £1,500, a lot of money back then. He was supposed to shoot and kill our business manager and fixer, Leslie Payne, who was grassing on us to the police. But he never saw it through and kept the money. That gave us the hump in itself. Then he started to cause trouble wherever he went. And we were getting complaints from club owners who were under our protection. Both Ronnie and I gave him warning after warning about his behaviour, but he never took any notice, so something had to be done. There was a party at Blonde Carol's in Evering Road, and Ronnie decided he would make a final attempt to straighten Jack out. So it was arranged for him to be invited to the party. He turned up very drunk and belligerent from the start. By now, Ronnie, whose moods and plans could change in a moment, had decided he didn't want to talk to him and told him to fuck off out of it in no uncertain terms. This didn't please Jack, who stormed around the room shouting, "You can't fucking well treat me like this," all the while punching his fist into his open palm. When he smashed his fist through a window, I'd had enough. I pulled a gun out and aimed it at his head. It didn't fire. I made another attempt, and the same thing happened. So with Jack by now throwing punches, I picked a knife off the table and stabbed him 2 or 3 times until he was lying still on the floor. He'd had every opportunity to leave the party, but such was the man. He would not be told what to do. If he'd gone when Ronnie ordered him to, that episode in my life would never have happened, and perhaps I wouldn't be where I am today. Ronnie and I left immediately, and the last thing I remember is seeing Chris Lambrianou crying at the top of the stairs. Brother Charlie, who was in bed at the time of the killing, had nothing whatsoever to do with what happened other than that he came round after we telephoned him in a panic. We often fell back on Charlie as the voice of reason when things got a bit out of hand, and he paid a heavy price for trying to help his brothers. Charlie served 7 years, and the Lambrianou brothers, Chris and Tony, were both sentenced to 15 years. Another friend, Freddie Foreman, whose drinking club in the Old Kent Road I was a frequent patron of, was convicted of being an accessory after the fact to murder and received 10 years. Both brother Charlie and Freddie were convicted on the evidence of Ronald Hart. Later on, Freddie was in Leicester prison at the same time as Eddie Richardson and me, and we all trained together in the gym. This one incident was to bring our lives tumbling down like a pack of cards. Whether we'd have been pursued by the law quite so strongly if it wasn't for Jack, I don't know, but shortly afterwards, everything began to unravel and we were arrested. Little did I imagine at the time that 26 years later, I'd still be locked up and writing about the incident that brought it all about. I've no regrets about killing Jack the Hat because he was the most vexatious person I'd come across in many years. I do regret that perhaps with a bit of forethought, it need never have happened. But in the heat of the moment, everything goes out of the window. When we were arrested in 1968, many of our so-called friends gave evidence against us at our trial. Once we were convicted and sentenced to 30 years imprisonment, it seemed as though we had ceased to exist. Every week we looked for letters or some other form of contact from people we had known for years, but nothing came. And eventually we gave up and accepted that out of sight meant out of mind, even to close trusted and respected friends. It was a long time before we found out that the Regional Crime Squad had threatened all those, other than family, that if they continued in support of us, they could end up in prison themselves. Big Tommy Brown, our old friend the Bear, was one of those people, and that great man was to die, still hurting from the thought that he had let us down. Only recently, I received a letter from an old friend who had not been in touch in all the years I had been away. He asked for my forgiveness and explained the by now familiar story. Watched and threatened, he had been forced to give up trying to contact me and had only just realized that those restrictions had been lifted. Of course, I forgave him, as I did all the others. It was out of their hands and I understood. What this does show is how despicable the law can be. Our sentences weren't enough. It had to ostracize Ron and me by blackmailing our supporters. It's no wonder it's despised by many people when such underhanded methods are used. For 17.5 years, I was classed as a Category A prisoner and held in high-risk security. This meant I never moved anywhere within the prison without being escorted by 2 screws and Alsatian guard dogs. A pink light bulb would be left shining in my cell all night so that the screws could watch my every movement, like I was a goldfish in a bowl. Cat A also meant that my visitors, who were few, had to submit 3 photographs of themselves to the authorities, one of which would be filed with the Home Office. The police would also visit the intended visitor at home to question and vet them. If they had a criminal record, their application would be refused. These rules even applied to my parents. Lord Mountbatten introduced this action, and at first, myself and other prisoners went on hunger strike against these stringent regulations, but it was to no avail. Cat A rules still apply today throughout the prison system, and in my opinion, they are not necessary beyond 4 walls. They create a prison within a prison. With the exception of Harry Roberts, who received 30 years in 1966 for shooting 3 policemen. I spent longer than anyone else in this category. It's a double punishment, created to make communication difficult between the prisoner and his visitors, rather than the prevention of escapes. And that brings us to the end for this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.